PC gaming has officially entered its slop era. As well as generative AI being used in game development by lazy cheapskates, Nvidia's latest DLSS 5 is setting the precedent for that artless, sterile, machine-generated touch to come to all games, however much passion and talent went into creating them. The prevailing narrative seems to be that AI is somehow inevitable, that ultimately it's all for our benefit, and that we'll all be glad we made the sacrifice in the long run. By deliberately building a PC that avoids the latest hardware developments, I could be missing out on exciting new technologies that will go on to define the future of gaming. Good. This is the Anti-Slop Machine, and I built it mostly out of spite. The world is getting worse because of billionaires, venture capitalists, and other degenerate gamblers, and this PC is a reaction to all that. I can't build PCs with DDR5 anymore, so f*** it, I've used DDR4. The future of gaming graphics is apparently generative AI all the way down, so f*** it, I've used a previous gen Radeon that doesn't even support frame gen. SSD pricing is as high as it was back when the technology was brand new, if not higher. So I'm gonna use one I got before the crisis, because I've already done my hard drive video for 2026 and I didn't really want to do another. I'm angry, but I'm not a sadist. All of this might seem like an overreaction, and ultimately a pointless one. I'm not really punishing anyone after all, and by deliberately omitting genuinely useful new tech, I'm actually only hurting myself. But this isn't really intended as a buyer's guide. It's just a gentle reminder that this so-called progress is all optional, and we can get along perfectly well without it. To build the Anti-Slop Machine, I started by setting myself one important rule: no windows. Deciding to go with Basite OS means no more Copilot prompts or random ads popping up where they're not wanted, but it also focuses down my choice of GPUs. After all, even if Nvidia weren't the main purveyors of the tools behind AI-Slop, Linux just doesn't always play nicely with GeForces right now. As it happens though, choosing an AI-free GPU pretty much means going with Radeon anyway. Nvidia has been sliding machine learning hardware into their consumer products since Turing, or even earlier if you count the now mostly obsolete Titan Volta. Intel's Arc series has featured ML cores since day one, which is normally considered to be a benefit for these cards, but for this project it pretty much excludes every single one of them. AMD, meanwhile, dragged their feet in producing GPUs with dedicated ML cores, and only the latest 9000 series features them. Normally, I'd say that's a serious detriment to the otherwise very capable 7000 series. However, in this case, it's exactly what I'm looking for. The RX 7900 XT ticks most of the boxes for modern gaming. Enough raw performance for 1440p and 4K in some older and lighter weight titles, enough VRAM to support high quality textures and meshes, and some degree of ray tracing. Enough to support those games which require RT to run in the first place, while not enough for super demanding features like path tracing. Placing a Butlerian jihad on machine learning tech means missing out on some good stuff, including ray regeneration. Not a major concern except in one or two titles, but one example of positive AI-based graphics technology that this system is just gonna have to live without. It also nixes any possibility of ML-enhanced frame generation, and it used to mean that ML upscaling was out of the question too. FSR version 4 originally needed FP8 hardware, found only in the 9000 series. However, it seems that life found a way, and now the 7900 XT and the rest of the RDNA 3 based cards also have access to a somewhat stunted Int 8 based version of FSR 4 upscaling. When this new feature accidentally leaked a while back, it was extensively tested by people like Ancient Gameplays, who found there's a pretty big performance penalty from using FSR4 on RDNA 3 compared to RDNA 4, but image quality seems to be unaffected. Again, I know this seems like cutting off my nose to spite my face, but I'm making a point here. Choosing components for the rest of the system is less about kicking back against the state of things and more about trying to survive it. I switched to DDR5 based platforms for all of my testing a couple of years ago, but since then AMD's socket AM5 and Intel's 1851 have become out of reach for most new builds due to prohibitive memory pricing. Those prices are high because availability is low, and availability is low because the DRAM supply is being
consumed by the infinite hunger of the learning machine.
I literally just found my 5700X3D this morning, but I couldn't find it for the life of me before I started making this video, so I went with the next best thing, a Ryzen 5 5500X3D, with the same 3D V cache, but just 6 cores and 12 threads, and a lower 4GHz clock speed. The things that make it good for gaming also mean that it's not really up to snuff for real productivity work, but who cares? AI is going to take your job anyway. It's not even that good for AI workloads, but it is a powerhouse for gaming, coming close to some CPUs from much newer platforms in processor-intensive titles. It's also not that expensive for what it offers, though to be fair, the non-X3D chips are a better buy for most people. I know this wasn't supposed to be a buyer's guide, but I guess I can't help myself. The relatively humble specs of the 5500X3D means it doesn't need a monster cooling solution, but it still benefits from a quiet, effective air cooler, and that's where Cryrig comes in. They offered to support the channel by sending over their new H6 tower cooler for this build. This super slim L-shaped radiator with 6 6mm heat pipes and 120mm ARGB fan is rated up to a 200W TDP, and is supplied with brackets for AM4 and 5, LGA 1851, 1700, 1200, 1150 through 56, and even 1366 for you first-gen i7 enjoyers. The L-shaped design helps maximise RAM compatibility, and there's room to hook a second fan to the rear if you need a bit of a boost. Check out the Cryrig H6 and the rest of their range at the link in the description. For RAM, I have, of course, a DDR4 kit. This is fancy stuff. At 3600 CL14, it's actually lower latency than a 6000 CL28 kit of DDR5, even if overall bandwidth is quite a bit lower, but to fit in with the theme, I've dropped it down to 3200 CL16. This better reflects the kinds of DDR4 that can be easily and affordably purchased. At least affordable by the standards of mid-2026, but shouldn't really affect performance in this system. Power is being provided by a Corsair 850W unit, and storage is an NVMe drive from Crucial, a brand which no longer exists because of AI, and a product which is unaffordable because of AI, but which doesn't directly enable AI features in games, so I'm letting myself off the hook with this one. The one thing I didn't bother with is a case, and that's a shame because it's the one aspect of PC building that isn't directly affected by AI. In fact, to inspire people to spend some money in these dark financial times, there are some pretty compelling deals out there. However, this is all getting torn down again once I've finished making the video, so I just set the whole thing up on a frame I bought from AliExpress. To keep with the theme of the anti-AI gaming PC, I thought it was worth using the benchmarking section to talk about the actual implementation of generative AI by developers. And to kick it all off, I chose a game that seems thematically appropriate. Arc Raiders originally used recorded voice actors in order to train an AI model, which was then used to produce the lines for their ostensibly human characters to say, with predictably uncanny, inauthentic results. After some modest backlash, developers Embark Studios have done a U-turn and apparently re-recorded the lines using the original actual factual actors, so this game about a world where machines have taken over is now, I guess, actually made by humans. But how does it run? Well, Arc Raiders is known for being one of the good ones when it comes to games made using Unreal Engine 5, and it's not that surprising that the Anti-Slop Machine can obtain a moderately stable 60 FPS in the test area, even at 1440p with cinematic settings. That is with the so-called RTX global illumination set to static, or basically RT off. It also has options for varying degrees of dynamic lighting, using ray tracing to calculate illumination and shadows in real time. Calling it RTX implies that it's an Nvidia-specific feature, but that's just because the game was made with Nvidia as an official partner, and the Radeon GPU can actually run this feature quite well, losing about 20% performance at the epic setting compared to RT off. That being said, I found that the heavier areas can drop below 40 at times, so I thought it would be prudent to give some upscaling a shot. As mentioned in the intro, FSR4 is now available on RX 7000 series GPUs like this one, and the latest version of Proton Experimental, the translation layer built into Linux for running Windows games, enables FSR4 in compatible games without having to mess around with tools like Optiscaler. Arc Raiders doesn't specifically mention which version of FSR it's using, but the image quality, even at performance, is way too high here to be anything else. Also, the performance gain is too underwhelming, as this 2x scaling factor is only netting a 25% gain in average FPS, bringing it essentially back up to the same level as native resolution, minus the ray tracing. If you needed confirmation that IO Interactive are good eggs, as well as using their own in-house game engine and eschewing a lot of the more intensive modern graphical features, they've outright stated that their new title, 007 First Light, was not made using AI-generated assets. All of the characters are modelled by artists, voiced by actors, speaking dialogue written by human writers. I haven't played enough of the game to know if that last part is a good thing, and this is James Bond, so the bar is only moderately high in that regard. My first experience running the game on the Anti-Slop Machine was that something seemed off. The frame rate at 1440 very high was lower than I expected, and that turned out to be due to a problem that arose several times during the making of this video. Bazzite, being developed from Valve's SteamOS, still has a few small hangovers from the Steam machine, and that apparently included an invisible frame rate limit. After finding a solution online that I then dropped into my already quite busy command line, the game began to make full use of the GPU and obtained a very respectable 80 FPS in the training area. To my knowledge, Resident Evil Requiem was not developed using any generated assets. Though, of course, the irony of my Google query, "Does RE Requiem use AI?" being answered by an AI, isn't lost on me. Capcom is among the apparently 50% of Japan-based developers who have copped to using AI as a tool to improve efficiency, but also claims to believe in the importance of human creativity, for whatever that's worth. It has, however, been at the very centre of the current discussion around generative AI in gaming, thanks to Nvidia's first DLSS 5 demo. ML-powered upscaling, frame generation, and yassifying aside, there's plenty to be enjoyed on an AI-free PC. Straight out of the box, cranked up to max settings, and with FSR set to native resolution, the game is crisp and smooth at a 94 FPS average, with percentile lows of 75. However, things aren't quite perfect. The game has ray tracing options which were simply unavailable, and once again that's because the OS thinks we're on a Steam Deck. Pasting in the command line argument once more fixes the issue, and with high RT, that average FPS is cut in half. Still arguably playable, but not as smooth as it could be. As I mentioned earlier, FSR was set to native, meaning the upscaling solution was only being used for anti-aliasing. Setting it to FSR performance, in this context, is rendering at just 720p, and that lower resolution almost makes up for the FPS loss to ray tracing. As with Arc Raiders, overall image quality holds up remarkably well despite the huge scaling factor, But one area that is unfortunately less impressive is reflections. Sometimes effects like these were already running at a fraction of native resolution, so adding FSR just compounds matters. Thankfully, ray tracing in RE Requiem isn't just for more accurate reflections, otherwise you might as well just skip RT altogether. Lighting and shadows are better looking and more realistic on the RT setting, so if you can live with the ugly reflections, this could be a good way to play. Like Arc Raiders, Clair Obscur's developers did a 180 on using AI-generated assets after launch. The game was originally developed with AI-generated placeholders, and several of these made it all the way to the finished version of the game before being patched out after launch. If these are the assets in question, I think they might still be AI-generated, because they're clearly written in some fictional nonsense language. If Arc Raiders is one of the UE5 titles that PC gamers can mostly approve of, this is sadly the other kind. The Epic preset is a bit too much even for a GPU of this caliber, and without dropping settings it only manages around 49 FPS on average. There are of course settings below Epic, and I dare say if you find a good optimization guide, you could come up with the right combination of settings to deliver more performance without hurting quality too much. But of course, we also have access to FSR. Unfortunately, it's not clear which version of FSR Clair Obscur is using, but I'm fairly certain it's not FSR 4, as even at the quality preset, upscaling from 1080p internally, the visuals are noticeably softer. It does, however, put the average performance up to 68 FPS, which, in a timing-sensitive game like this, could be a compromise worth making. Death Stranding 2's creator, Hideo Kojima, has apparently had a change of heart. He appeared pretty enthusiastic about AI in a project for Prada a few months ago, but since then he's clarified that he is no longer interested in generative AI, that it won't replace real human-made art in his lifetime, and stating that he prefers to use AI as a janitor for creative chores. Death Stranding 2 performs just fine on the Anti-Slop Machine, but I was perhaps a little overzealous with the quality settings, as it does fall a little below the 60 FPS mark even without RT, and only manages around 30 FPS with ray tracing turned on. Reaching 60 in rasterized rendering only requires FSR quality, which is hardly noticeable at all, and increases performance to over 70 FPS. But ray tracing requires a heavier hand. I pushed FSR all the way to performance and could only manage just over 50 FPS. It's still playable and looks good enough that I'm not really surprised anymore, but it won't be good enough for everyone. Crimson Desert is another big 2026 release that everyone's been talking mostly positively about. However, it seems like developers Pearl Abyss included some AI-generated assets in some of the wall art around the game world. They have since apologised and promised to remove them via patches, but I can't confirm or deny whether this has actually happened. Honestly, I hadn't even noticed it was there. I literally only ever run this game to benchmark it. Speaking of, at max settings, the lighting quality preset is particularly demanding and drives performance way down to 34 FPS and below. Performance FSR can improve that up to 60+, and again, it's really not as bad looking as you might think if you're more accustomed to older versions of AMD's upscaler. Still, you can avoid needing FSR altogether by using the cinematic preset, which is a little short of 60 FPS but still very tolerable, and the ultra preset is over 60 most of the time. Like Capcom, Kingdom Come 2's developers have come out in favour of using AI for workflow, have excused the use of generative AI for placeholders and concept art, and have apparently laid off a language translator in order to replace their job with AI. Kingdom Come 2 apparently doesn't feature any generated assets at the time of writing, but I guess we shouldn't be surprised if something uncanny turns up in the future. All of which sucks because the Anti-Slop Machine handles it admirably, managing to hit 60 FPS at native 1440p using the experimental quality preset, which I guess is intended to be something like the Can It Run Crisis mode, but which is actually quite achievable on modern hardware. Still, if a 60 average is too close to the mark to you, the Ultra preset hits nearly 80 FPS and is perfect for a VSync experience. AI-generated videos with de-aged celebrities has been a popular trend lately, so nobody would be at all surprised if Machine Games had used AI to rebuild Harrison Ford circa 1981. However, it turns out that this pretty decent approximation of Dr. Jones was achieved by regular, talented artists, and the only search hits for the Great Circle AI are people dissing the game's enemy behaviour. When it first launched in 2024, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle earned a reputation for being hard to work with. Not unlike Harrison Ford. It requires RT hardware and 8GB of VRAM, and even on an 8GB card it can be extremely temperamental. Thankfully, the RX 7900 XT has both RT hardware and way more than 8GB of VRAM, and actually runs the Great Circle like a dream. 80 FPS at the Supreme preset is not too shabby. Doom developer id's lead services programmer has expressed largely negative sentiments towards generative AI, so it seems a safe bet that Doom the Dark Ages doesn't feature any. However, in the wake of recent management changes at Xbox, id have been subject to massive job cuts, so who knows what the future holds. There's usually a lot of scalability in Doom the Dark Ages settings, but in this case it's not really making a difference. At 1440 Ultra settings I saw 67 FPS, and dropped to 1440 High I saw 67 FPS. On reflection, this might have been another of those Linux bugs that stems from the OS's origins on the Steam Deck, but it's sufficient for a playable experience either way, and besides, I was more curious about path tracing. Up until now, most of the games I've tested that offer path-traced rendering have hidden it from AMD users, as it's principally a GeForce technology, and one that especially older Radeon cards will struggle with. Anyway, curiosity bit me in the ass, as the average at 1440p was barely double digits, and all the demons were moving in slow motion, as was my Doom guy. Turning on FSR performance improved things significantly to around 30 FPS, but I'm not sure this is the good kind of FSR, cause it doesn't look all that sharp. I'm paraphrasing somewhat, but when gamers didn't think Borderlands 4's graphics warranted the sky-high system requirements, Gearbox CEO Randy Pitchford effectively told them to shut up and stop being afraid of AI performance enhancers. Well, as nice as it would be to simply engage frame generation to turn these low FPS into something more playable, it doesn't really work that way, Randy. You can't apply FG to 30 FPS and expect to feel like you're playing at 120, even if that's what the frame counter in the corner says. With the right combination of settings and resolutions, you can in fact get a playable experience in Borderlands 4 on an AI-free PC, averaging 40 FPS at the very highest settings and capable of 60 plus with some compromises. But I'd argue that you shouldn't bother. The Last of Us Part 2 was developed in the late 2010s and first released in 2020, so predates much of the current obsession around the topic of AI. It has, however, been tangentially affected by AI. The aforementioned RAM crisis has caused the established tech giants like Sony to circle the wagons and protect their interests, which has meant higher prices on PS5 consoles, discontinuing the future production of physical copies of their games, and the decision to cancel future PC ports. The Last of Us Part 2 is therefore probably the last Naughty Dog title that will ever officially make it to PC. Which is a shame, because it does really well if you have the VRAM. We, of course, have access to 20GB of the stuff, and the 7900 XT acquits itself admirably, averaging 80 FPS with settings absolutely cranked, including the 16 times anisotropic filtering, which isn't included in the usual very high preset. It's the nature of social media to sort people into tribes, and I'm aware that by making this video, I'm probably going to be filed into the anti-AI camp. And that's fair enough. In truth, I would be fine if AI were just a tool for making our lives easier, as important to society as Google Drive and autocorrect. And I actually like a lot of features AI has enabled, like upscaling and RT noise reduction. I've gone on record recently that I actually don't hate FrameGen anymore, even if I'm still not 100% sure who it's supposed to be for. I'm not even particularly anti-DLSS 5, at least on a purely surface level. Personally, I'd have included it with the NVIDIA Ansel toolset rather than DLSS, but I guess that wouldn't have gained as much attention. No, my problem is with the idea of destroying economies, ecologies, neighbourhoods, and the whole concept of truth just to make the line go up for sociopathic socialites, and generative AI is just the latest version of this. If bursting the bubble that threatens so many of the things we hold dear in the world meant hypothetically sacrificing all of the gaming features related to AI, I think we'll do just fine without. Thanks to Cryrig for their support. Check out the H6 and their other coolers at the link below. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.